This week we begin the third book of the Torah, Sefer Vayikrah, and Vayikrah follows the end of Sefer Shemais in Parsha's Pekudei, where over there the whole Sefer finishes discussing the cloud of glory that would rest on the Mishkan, and it says that when the cloud would rest, then the Yidden would rest, and the Mishkan would stay in one place. When the cloud would rise from the Mishkan, then the Yidden knew it was time to travel. And as the last pasuk goes, Ki anan Hashem ala Mishkan yemam, the cloud was on the Mishkan throughout the day, and fire was there at night, in front of the eyes of all the Jews, and during all of their travels. In other words, we see that the end of Sefer Shemais is talking about the cloud blocking or covering, filling the space of the Mishkan. And then comes Sefer Vayikra, which starts Vayikra el Moshe, and God calls to Moshe. Now, there's an interesting juxtaposition, or in simpler English, connection between these two ideas, how Sefer Shemais ends and how Vayikra begins, which is that it seems like these two ideas are opposites. A cloud represents cloudiness, lack of clarity and darkness. And Vayikra, El Moshe, God calling to Moshe, seems to represent clarity and seeing things and hearing things clearly, directly from God. If a cloud represents darkness, then Vayikra represents revelation, God revealing himself and calling out. So what's the connection between these two ideas? And Chassidus explains a fundamental idea, the concept, as King Solomon says, Yisrein ha'or min ha'choshech, the benefit and the real radiance and strength of light is when it's born specifically out of darkness. That in one chapter of life, sometimes the chapter seems like it's ending, and it's ending on a dark note, or we find ourselves in a negative situation. But oftentimes that's just a beginning for a new chapter of Vayikra el Moshe, and sometimes we see the most revelation, and we see God's calling specifically in dark times and when times are tough. And that's the connection between these two ideas, that Shemais ends telling us that there's a cloud on top of the Mishkan, and then followed by that cloud, this is usually the rule of life, when sometimes things seem cloudy and things seem dark, that is usually just the beginning of actually finding your calling, finding your soul, and finding God in the cracks and in the dark spaces. When someone works out, how is it that they build muscle? So it says that they're actually tearing microtissue. Their muscles are breaking. But specifically because they break, then the muscle comes back to rebuild itself with a vengeance. And that's also, again, when someone is in a situation when they don't see godliness, and it seems like they don't know where they're going, they lack clarity. That's oftentimes for true, authentic soul and noticing God's hand in reality and seeing God's calling, His Vayikra in our lives, oftentimes happen when our egos and our expectations of what we wanted our lives to look like, when that falls down, that's when we're actually humble enough to hear the Vayikra. There's a powerful story that was shared at the Kinnis HaShluchim a few years ago from a Rabbi Zaklis. It says that he was always glorified shluchim and always dreamt of being a shliach. And when he was dating his wife, he told her that he plans on going on shlichus and to open up a Chabad house and to go be the Rebbe's emissary. And she said she'll go anywhere except for Russia. They get married, and a shlichus offer comes up in Russia, in Siberia. And he says, no, it's not for me, it's not for my wife. And Rabbi Lazar tells him, at least go try it out. The Rebbe says that you should usually do due diligence into these things, so at least go for a Shabbos, go for a Purim. So he went with his wife and little baby, and he said they went to a building with no elevator. They had to climb up 9 flights of steps to the rundown apartment. They go make a Purim thing in the one synagogue in town. There's it looks like a wreck. It looks like a complete shack with a toilet outside. He said, and that was a Jewish community, a rundown shul with a toilet outside. They do Purim, they get some Jews together. He said it's a very warm, older Jewish community. And before they leave, he goes back to the shul to lock up on their way out of Siberia and on their way out of Russia. And he sees that the whole shul was ransacked. The whole place was turned over, Sefer Torah on the floor, Svarim on the floor, all chairs upside down, and even swastikas spray painted into the walls. He calls Rabbi Lazar, and Rabbi Lazar wants to give this proper news coverage so that it's not just going to be dealt with in a small way by the local police, but that the actual Russian news will notice this, and hopefully higher-ups in the government will take care of it. And the media comes to meet with, to go take pictures and a video of what happened in the show, and they're sitting with the Rabbi Zaklis. and they're videoing him and saying, are you the rabbi of this town? And he said, I had a moment's decision. I said, yes, I'm the rabbi of this town. We came here to try to strengthen Judaism. And he didn't realize how far-flung this proclamation that he made went. Went across all news outlets in Russia. Went back to Israel. People were calling him from Israel about his new shlichus. And eventually, when him and his wife went back home to reconsider, he said, the whole world knows that we're the shluchim of Siberia, and the only ones that aren't in on this are ourselves. So they decided to move there, and they built up, it looks like a massive campus and complex and deal with hundreds of Jews in the capital of Siberia. And as Rabbi Zaklis said, if the anti-Semites knew what their pogrom would bring, how it would literally bring Chabad to Siberia, they would have thought twice. He did not plan on going there as the rabbi, but the darkness specifically, the havoc and the anti-Semitism, the hatred, is what actually brought out in him to own the situation. And usually that's what happens in our lives. When plan A fails, that makes us own up with plan B, which usually comes from a much deeper, much more real, much more holy and humble place. And specifically when plan A crashes, or when we see cloudiness, when we see darkness, and we're not sure how we could forge forward, then when we find that strength, that new muscle tissue, or at least the new soul tissue, and that makes us be able to forge forward and to overcome that darkness, that from the Anan specifically comes the Vayikrah, from the darkness comes our ability to hear God's calling. This is also true in someone's personal life and in their spiritual life. When someone sinned, when someone made the wrong decisions, we could either view that as, I'm a failure, or no, the Rebbe actually says over here too, that when someone brings cloudiness into their lives, that could just be one chapter, but that end of that chapter could bring to the beginning of the next chapter, which is Vayikrah again. The spiritual muscle tissue has broken, but that means that's an opportunity for new muscle tissue to grow in its place with a vengeance and make this person much stronger, and that's the concept of a Baal Tshuva. That a Baal Tshuva is someone that has sinned, that has went against God's will, or that has slipped up spiritually, but they find the strength to repent, confess, and it says that the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that the greatness of the Baal Tshuva is that he's pulled to God with much more strength even than the tzaddik, which again visually fits very well with this example of someone that works out, that specifically when the muscles tear and when things break, then what comes through is something much stronger. And then both in things that happen to us, we get to see God's calling, and even with decisions that we do for ourselves, we get to see our own neshama come out much more when we decide to own up to those tears and to try to rebuild what we broke. Have a great Shabbos.